So, a lot of messages because the comedy industry lost a great this week, didn't it?
Absolutely.
Mr. Sean Locke is gone. Not only
a kicker that was.
Yeah.
Do you know what was weird? So I messaged Sam and was like, "Oh, Sean Locke's dad." She was like, "Oh my god, he's younger than me dad." And I was like, "Well, he's younger than my dad, but he's also a comic who's died before he's 60." And even as a 29-year-old, it makes you go, "Ugh." He's one of us.
Yeah. If it like for like an hour, I was like, "Wow, that's fucking awful."
And I sort of forgot how much I loved his work, you know.
I think everyone did. I think as a nation, we all went, "Oh God, how many clips have you watched since he died?"
I've watched The Tiger Who Came for a Pint, and the Rectum of the Year. Oh my God!
I beat Fern Cotton.
Maradona.
Maradona to me, I think, like being really, really overly critical. I think that's sort of like an obvious one. He's in South America, and it's
right.
I beat Fern Cotton in Rectum of the Year, where he's shitting to the point people are being sick. I beat Fern Cotton. I think is one of the funniest lines I've ever heard in any bullshit bit. He'd have been unbelievable on this.
God, yeah.
They got a chance to. He was so creative. Like when you're watching 8 out of 10 Cats, a lot of those starters they've had before. They've been prepped on it. Sometimes I watch this back, and sometimes we miss open goals all the time. I mean, particularly on Monday when we recorded the Patreon exclusive after one of the heaviest nights of my recent life. That turn a Disney film into porn. Like people have been commenting like, guys, because we were like, ah.
Yeah.
But that's because we genuinely don't prep that stuff. And it works for this pod. Obviously it works. It's what we've been doing. Sean Locke was both amazing at that slightly prepared stuff where it's not scripted like his material, but he's just been given a few days to like, when you're like, Sean, how do you think you could would be described? And he was like, "Oh God, I don't think you could use words. I'm more of an idea or
a smell.
I'm like a fragrance."
Yeah.
Like if he's just had time to write that stuff, not only is he lightning quick or was lightning quick when he was fucking around like what we do, but the beautiful what did he say? Like wet tarmac or a vet's flannel.
Yeah.
Mate, it's those simple, lovely throwaway lines. And you know how someone's good at that? You're making other legendary comics piss themselves. Not just like, oh yeah, fair play.
Yeah.
There's like other legends going, jeez.
Claude the Pen is one of my favourite TV bits ever. I watch it regularly. I love it so much. And when Jimmy's laughing normally, like he's not doing that fucking weird laugh, and he's crying laughing.
Yeah. Miles Jupp holds his own in that little clip, doesn't he?
Yeah.
I won't spit on you when we're having sex. Like Sean's just very kindly offered not to spit on one of our guests.
I never went to see him on a tour. I just saw him at that time at Altitude, and I love this stand up. But I think in those clips you see the real genius of the man.
Yeah.
And I get that because some of the bits of comedy I'm most proud of, we've done on here. Like I'm not speaking for Sean Locke. Maybe he preferred doing stand-up. I know he bitched about doing Countdown quite a lot.
Yeah.
Fucking him whinging about that is hilarious. But I never loved this. He wasn't one of my favourite stand-ups. Did you see him live?
I'd never seen him live. I did like his stand-up.
Finley saw him live.
Did you?
Yeah.
I did like his stand-up. But I think as a panel show guest, I think he's probably the best to have done it. He's as funny as anyone on those panels.
Yeah, and Grumpy Old Man, I think, is very easily done. I've seen Grumpy Old Man done a lot. We've talked about it. We've seen it done on the circuit. We've seen Grumpy Old Man done by young, quite good-looking men, and it doesn't it just doesn't work. But he did Grumpy Old Man without ever being... He did it with creativity and flair and almost like charm. Like, I don't know, it's really difficult to describe. Someone being a miserable cunt while being really creative and playful. It's quite a clever thing to get right. And And I just go back to that time I met him in Altitude, which I tweeted about. But if you, I don't know, I feel like we put a little clip out, but that's the only time I met him. And I met him and Bill Bailey on the transit from Munich airport to Altitude Festival, which is like a ski and comedy festival. This hasn't been, I haven't told this story for a while. So if you're an OG listener and you've done a lot, you'll have heard me talk about this. But if you're new, I basically got booked on Altitude. I think you're doing it next year, aren't you?
Yeah.
And they sort out the transport, and whoever's landing at the same time will get put in the same transport. I got told that I'd be with 2 other comics in a minivan. And then the day before, got told that one of those comics will be Bill Bailey. And so I was waiting at the bar. The guy who is running the transport, driving the minivan, was like, yeah, Sean Locke's going to be here in a bit. So I just I'm kind of excited that I'm going to be with Bill Bailey. And they're like, yeah, Bill's coming in a little bit later. Sean's just getting his bag. I was like, right. So you're like, oh God, I'm going to meet 2 famous people. And I don't know what you're like with this. We've talked about meeting our heroes in comedy. Not that these are 2 of my out and out, like we've done the Mount Rushmore of comedy and everything. These aren't 2 of the people that like I would go weird with.
Yeah.
But Bill Bailey and Sean Locke are fucking legends, like UK comedy stand-up legends. And it made me go, oh, Sean Locke and Bill Bailey in one minivan. And then I had this little slither of fear of like, oh, I hope they're not cunts.
Yeah, I always get that. That's a big... Whenever I'm meeting someone like that, and it normally happens in Edinburgh for me, or occasionally in London, but you meet someone big. And I remember when I met Mickey Flanagan, we've got the same representation, and he was sat with my agent in the Abattoir bar. And I just went over and spoke to Christian, and he's like, have you met Mickey before? And I was like, no. And he said, let me introduce you. So he said, Mickey, this is one of my newer clients, Adam. He's a working class lad from Liverpool, blah, blah, blah. And I went, nice to meet you, mate. So when Christian actually sorted me some tickets out to come and see you in the Echo Arena. And he went, where the fuck's that one then? They all fucking echo.
It's pretty fucking good.
That was just that's how it was a bit
sound
sounding funny. And then spoke for a couple of minutes. And then I just went and I wasn't in there to meet Christian. I was there to go and have a drink with a load of comics. And they would just happen to be there. And
the thing is, comics who don't give a shit about that, there's something wrong there, because Mickey Flanagan doesn't need to be nice to anyone, really, does he? And I know you're on the same roster, but he doesn't have to be sound and everything. No. But he also does know how important you as a comic on that roster, less experienced, younger, how important that meeting him is. And the bigger, more famous comics that can be arsed just being decent humans, because we've talked about a few that haven't. We've not named them directly or whatever, but when they're not, it's just so cunty, because the newer act, the younger, less experienced act, will remember that for a long time. And it's a kicker. Ross Noble was amazing to me when I was starting out, when he was one of my favourite acts, and it was really big for me to meet him.
First comic I ever seen live.
He was so sound, it was almost like we'd started out together. You're like, I am just some cunt that you met on this bill. Like, I got a tap on the shoulder when I was having a beer at Munich airport at the bar, and it was Sean Locke, and he just went, all right, Dan, you're Dan. Went, all right, we've got 20 minutes. I'll have a beer. Got himself a beer. And we chatted like you just got to a green room early and you were on the bill together. You'd not met, but I'm opening or emceeing and he's closing. That was the tone of the conversation, and it never changed. Bill Bailey turned up, and they were obviously best mates from back in the day. Now, I've found out this week that they actually were Bezos, but I could have told you that from that transit. They were just like old mates. Never once on that 2-3 hour journey did I feel like I was less important to Sean than Bill. Or Bill Bailey travels with 2 roadies who at first I thought they were in his band, and then I was like, yeah, but Bill Bailey doesn't have a band. He's got so much equipment, if you see, which is one of the most amazing things you can see live is Bill Bailey on form. But he has so much kit. He's got 2 roadies. All of us were in this van with some driver who works for Altitude Festival. And then we stopped very early at a service station just outside Munich. It's cold, it's pissing it down. And Bill Bailey wandering around that service station was so funny, because one of his tour guys is obviously like borderline babysitter. Just keeps him on a lead because he's such a man-child, and he's got a fucking credit card. He came back in with an assortment of crisps, pop, like hats, toys. He's like, oh, a fucking dinosaur. And then Sean Locke whipped out some...
I think I'm going to need one of them.
Right, yeah.
Probably me, isn't it?
Right. It's kind of, you've got to keep the credit card.
You're just as bad.
That's as very
No,
bad.
yeah. Sean Locke whipped out a bottle of peach schnapps, quite strong schnapps, and we just got gently hammered all the way into the mountains. And he was talking about Chelsea. He was a big Chelsea fan. Bill Bailey. It's just so funny. And I was asking a few questions without ever doing the like, you know what it's like as a comic. You're like, don't be too much of a fangirl.
Yeah.
Don't be a geek. But I like a little bit of the history of stand-up. If you talk to comics about when they started out and who they started with and who were their heroes when they started out, I'm telling you now, as if you're a younger comic, if you want to not be hack in comic conversation, get comics, however old they are, starting to talk about their first 6 months a year in stand-up, because it doesn't get talked about by journalists. It doesn't get talked about in dressing rooms loads. But comics love remembering the fucking morons that they first did open spots with and the people who they looked up to who have now been forgotten. So that's what I asked Sean about. And I said in the tweet, you can judge a lot. We've said it many a time on here. You can judge a lot by how comics treat younger comics. And Sean was so nice to me. They bumped into me in the cafe on the mountain skiing. I was skiing on my own because I didn't know loads of people, and they were skiing together. And again, came straight over. All right, Dan. All right. Fucking sat and had some fucking chips with me, and I don't know the guy, and I've seen him work. Obviously, like we've all done with the clips and everything. But I really mean that. Like in terms of the kind of bloke he was, that was so sound, that whole journey. And I think the outpouring of love this week has not just been from his fans. It's been from the people who knew him and had worked with him. And I really did, I got a little bit emotional when he died, just because I've lost people to cancer, and Laura's dad is suffering, and it's not good. And we are sort of in the middle of that, and it causes a lot of strain on my wife and everything. But also I just thought of it made me think about starting out and all your really close mates in stand-up. And I know his family have had their heart ripped out, but I also thought about Bill Bailey. Because he's lost his
Bill Bailey,
oldest best mate.
And even there's been a lot of tributes from circuit comics who were obviously the people you're talking about, the ones who you would never think, oh, they're good mates with Sean Locke. I seen Andre Vincent, who was I started with Sean and he's a great mate of mine and we haven't seen each other for a couple of years. Dave Johns, who's had a bit of success in recent years from acting and being in films and stuff. But these are the people that you're on about that start. They're not famous. They're not Bill Bailey, and they're not Jimmy Carr, who's obviously going to be devastated, and John Richardson and Jason Manford. These are circuit comics who are really good and have earned a living from comedy for a long time, who started with this man and considered him a really good mate. And
I thought about what if Adam went or whatever. It's more like the guys you've known from gig dot. Mm-hmm. It is a special bond of
if you
a love in it.
Who are the first three names in your head? Who are the three you started with if you had to pick three?
Randomly, it's if I talk about the very, very first gigs, it's Jason Cook. Mm-hmm. And Jason and I have drifted. We're not as close as we were. Yeah. He's gone on to have a lot of success. We see each other. We're old friends. When I did my very first podcast 4 or 5 years ago, went round to his house. I was at his wedding. But we've drifted as mates. But Jason's one of the first names I think of. John Cooper is a name that I don't know if we've ever even brought up on this podcast. He's a guy that does graphic design and a bit of stand-up. But we did our very first gigs together. And when I see him, sometimes he comes on a Christmas drink in Manchester. I could be with you and Carl, and John Cooper would be as important to me on that night out because I hardly see him, but because we did our first, second, third gigs. But Barry is my Barry's my oldest mate in stand-up from Gig Dot. And I thought about that like journey up into the hills. And I thought about Bill and Sean, how their careers have gone together. And I choked up and had to ring Barry because I was like, course families, wives, children, their whole world's been just decimated. But I was like, you sort of don't think about that. Oh, but not the Bezos from school, not your family and friends that you know from like, I'm talking about your old band of brothers who you started with. And I had to ring Barry and I got a bit choked and I wasn't going to tweet that. And Barry was like, tweet it, mate, because you've met him and it's a thing. And like, I don't know, you work with people like me and Adam have worked intensively for 2 years. There'll be a time that we look back on this and be like this, given enough time, we will romanticize this few years of our life.
Yeah.
And those guys that you've talked about them. Like Rob Thomas is the most annoying cunt online in the world. He's actually a bit of a teddy bear and he was there on Sunday. Freddie's fucking Freddie, isn't he? But he was there on Sunday to not just sharing our success, but yours. And those guys are especially important.
Oh, they're really good mates. Like, Rob started a few months after me, and Freddie, I wasn't really good mates with until a few years ago. The three I believe the lads I started with, the three names that my brain goes to is Brennan Reese, Pete Otway, and Lewis Calvert.
I knew you were going to say Lewis Calvert.
And Lewis
Lewis
came
over Tony, yeah.
What?
Lewis over Tony.
Yeah, because Tony started about a year after us.
Oh, did he? Yeah.
My first few gigs, even out of town, were with Lewis. We used to get the train together. We'd share lifts together. Like, my second ever gig was at Beat the Frog Preston, and me and Pete Otway joint won it, and Lewis was at the gig. And then, like, Brennan was doing Hot Water and the Manchester Frog, and then there's other people who were sort of around at the same time that I'm not quite as close with, like Steve Bugea and Pete Phillipson and Lewis Charlesworth. And I remember those as being the guys that were on every open mic night, every gong show. They were there.
Jay Edwards,
like the three that I in my head started with are Lewis Calvert, Brennan Reese, and Pete.
And people go, "Oh, it's great with your podcast how you're best mates." Hey, we are now.
Yeah,
we are now because of this.
Yeah,
but we weren't. Me and Adam have always gotten well, but there was a time when I remember him doing his very first gigs, and I thought I was the fucking bee's knees headliner compare. Just got on TV. When you started out, I'd just got on TV for the first time. I was like, who's this cocky fucking scouser? And I liked him because he was cocky, but mate, it's only in the last 2 or 3, 4 years. And the weird thing is, without sounding like an arsehole, you can never totally be Bezos. Maybe there's a few exceptions, unless you totally respect someone.
If you see each other as a peer,
you've got and that only happened for me 3 or 4 years ago. I've been a fan of what Adam does for a long time, but we're not best mates like that. We are now, but the people you started out with, it's such a strong, it's almost like a comedy sibling bond. And if I lost Barry, you wouldn't be seeing me for an episode, or like I'd lost a brother. And I know, like, for those names, like, yeah, it's Brennan's been on, but it runs really deep. And my heart went out to all the people that have lost Sean. But the people that weren't getting mentioned are like the guys who will just be heartbroken because they've lost one of their fucking boys.